as the father of Impressionism. In this painting, as you can see, he deals with the branch of Impressionism, and the Olympia painting belongs to realism. And as you can see, the women in these portraits are more liberal, independent, and more rebellious according to society's norms. So there are lots of portraits that he painted during the time of 19th century, and I will talk about Venice of Urbino right now by Titian. And it was an oil painting who is an Italian man. Titian was a Venetian man, and it was painted in 1534 and was perhaps completed after that, but it was sold until 1538. It depicts a nude young woman traditionally identified with the goddess Venus, reclining on a couch or bed in the sumptuous surroundings of a Renaissance palace. And it is now shown in Galleria degli Uffizi in Florence. And this painting actually is really similar to the Manet's Olympia. As you can see, there is a woman lying on a bed or a couch, and there's a maid in the background, and her beauty and perfection can be seen easily. And she is symmetrical. Her face is symmetrical and her body is symmetrical. There is a dog behind her, and dog always symbolizes loyalty. And as you can see, the focus in this painting is on the Venus. And actually, this painting was named after a long time this painting was published. This name was given because she is resembled as a goddess, Venus. And now I will talk about Manet's Olympia. There are lots of critics about this painting, but Olympia is a painting which was painted by Edouard Manet. Compared to contemporary artworks in that time, the painting was sensational and was criticized because of its bold message. There is a long tradition of female nude portraits, which goes back to ancient Greek and Roman mythology. Mostly goddesses are portrayed, but Olympia is different from all these paintings. The name of the prostitutes in that time was generally Olympia, and therefore it can be concluded that she is not a goddess or noble person, but she's a normal person. And in contrast, the flawless, perfect bodies and faces of nude portraits cannot be observed in here, because she is not a noble person and she is a ordinary person who lives in Paris. And she is painted not as perfect, but as she is. Her features are not idealized. Her face is not symmetrical. She looks pale and her hands are portrayed as big, and it is interpreted to drawing attention to her sexuality. So from the point of feminist critic, the painting is out of social norms and rebellion against human perfection. Not every woman is perfect, nor they should be, since it is a burden on their shoulders. Olympia directly look at us, the viewer. That's why it is different from other nude portraits, since they look at different directions, but in this painting, the viewers are confronted by her gaze. Her body is not perfect, and her feet are so small, her hands are so big, and her face is not as perfect as Venus of Urbino. And you can see a maid in the background bringing some flowers, which comes from her customer. And a figure researchers suggested that the lady is glancing in the area of the entryway as her customer shows up unannounced. So she is waiting for a customer, and Money immense what beauty could be for the modern world, and he unsettles social and artistic conventions. The black cat symbolizes women, especially sex workers. She refuses the flowers which probably comes from her customer. Prostitutes are considered as low-class people, but Olympia is a high-class woman. Black feminists criticize this painting since Manet did not exclude the figure of servant for the imaginative show, yet to make an ideological double among high contrast, great and awful, spotless and grimy. Actually, the dark noble speaks the old racial generalization of West, particularly when compared by an individual with a lighter skin. Also, she is not a fantasy of man, but she's an independent woman, both economically and sexually. So when we talk about the male gaze, at the point when feminism characterizes the male gaze, probably the best ongoing women activist examination of visual material, as I will see it, have been varied to do certain themes are particularly certain to show up: voyeurism, externalization, fetishism, scophobia, laid as the object of female delight and the conveyor of male need, and so forth. Man vision is perpetually described as male-centric, ideological, and phallocentric. Whatever in the look and its development gets away from the definition is normally acclimatized to the issues of female spectatorship. Male in the most refined analysis remains a fixed and, as a rule, negative term. Now and again, it appears that the female can work for the male just as an object of curious spectatorial ownership. And I will shortly make a comparison after this slide. Although a great deal of researchers have examined the effects of an objection on human self-perceptions and behavior, empirical research has yet to address how objectifying a woman affects the way she is perceived by others. We hypothesize that focusing on a woman's appearance will promote reduced perceptions of competence, and also by virtue of construing the woman as an object, perceptions of the woman as less human. So as you can see, there are lots of differences in here. In the first portrait, Olympia, which was painted by Manet, she's not perfect as Venus of Urbino, and she is not making any self-objectification. And she doesn't look like submissive. She doesn't look like sorry. And she's waiting for a customer. And even if she's not perfect, she is more independent than the Venus of Urbino. In the background, there's a black maid. And actually, it is really criticized because this painting was published after the abolition of slavery in Paris, in France. And there's a little cat, black cat, and it actually symbolizes the sex workers, mostly sneaky women. In nearly all paintings, it symbolizes that. And there's a dog on the right, and you can see that dog means loyalty. So there are lots of differences in the painting, but mostly the message is different. Thank you for listening, and this is the end of my slides. So, okay.
Dilara, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation on Titian's Venus of Urbino and Manet's Olympia. Well, ben duyuruyorum değil mi? 1 dakika ara veriyoruz o zaman. It's a break just for 1 second. Bulamadın mı?
Sıra bende şimdi.
Ben bir şey yapayım. O zaman bir şey daha söyleyecektim ama artık Buse'ye geçeyim, öyle mi?
Benim için olur.
Tamam. So, well, I was talking about this Manet's Olympia and Titian's Venus of Urbino, and I when this connection got lost, I was trying to say that feminism has caused a major change in values, in art criticism, and it will continue to challenge long-held beliefs and practices. So I really appreciate what you did, Dilara. Thank you so much for this wonderful and detailed presentation on feminist art criticism. And our fifth panelist today is Buse Acar, another senior student of the Department of American Culture Literature. And Buse will talk on a Marxist approach to La Malinke by Diego Rivera. So she will talk about Mexican muralism, and she will be talking about Diego Rivera's achievements. His name is synonymous with epic murals of social revolution in the first decades of the 20th century. And he's a lifelong Marxist who belonged to Mexican communism, an internationally recognized artist, a central figure in the Mexican mural movement. And I'm really looking forward to your presentation on La Malinke, Buse. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hocam. First of all, hi everyone. As Vukoja has just mentioned, I am going to be talking about one of the most famous murals of Diego Rivera. Due to the production process and the context of the mural, I prefer to criticize it with a Marxist approach. But before delving into the mural, I would like to talk a bit on how Marxism deals with art, how it categorizes it, and a bit on the life of Diego Rivera himself. So as we can see, this is Diego Rivera and his fourth wife, Frida Kahlo. Diego Rivera was a very prominent Mexican painter. His large frescoes helped establish the mural movement in Mexican and international art. Well, he has numerous marriages and children, but I don't think that is the point of delving into. Rather, I am more focused on his Marxist personality. Well, according to Marxism, art is a part of superstructure and it is treated as such. Art is seen to be caused directly by a particular social class or the economic base as a whole. So the focus is on the production of art, its relationship to the working class, and its exploitation by the ruling class. Some Marxist critics, such as Michael Baxendale, specifically focuses on the financial transactions involved in the production of artworks. It is paid for, it becomes a commodity. So art should be without financial concerns according to Marxism, or it is either a commodity or an apparatus for the ruling class. So the Marxist art criticism aims to demystify art and reveal its hidden agendas. Diego Rivera, as a member of the Mexican Communist Party, created a popular political mural series throughout Mexico that often included attacks on the ruling class, the church, and capitalism. After completing his education in Europe, he returned to Mexico in 1921 to become involved in the government-sponsored Mexican mural program. In 1926, sorry, it is 9, I'm confused about that, Rivera accepted a commission from the American ambassador of Mexico to paint murals in the Palace of Cortes in Cuernavaca, where the US had a consulate. Later on, he had done many commissioned work. His contracts included San Francisco Art Institute, Museum of Modern Art in New York, and Rockefeller Center. This is something problematic for a Marxist view of art, as I had just mentioned. Like Michael Baxendale said, once art is paid for, it becomes a commodity, and Diego Rivera kind of contradicts himself. I mean, he's a Marxist, but he sells his art. This is something problematic. Nonetheless, his murals adorn the interior of National Palace in Mexico City. He tended to glorify the Indian heritage of his country. Large public murals which glorified the Mexican people provided an alternate history for those who could not read it in books. The government at the time was seeking to redefine the nation, and Rivera's murals helped in creating a new national identity. Mexican mural movements aimed to decolonize their history and to create a national identity for which they looked back at pre-colonial era. Colonization and conquest mean the formation of a systemic and systematic oppression of many kinds, such as elitism, racism, and sexism. The decolonization process, or the wish to dismantle it, aims to put an end to all of these. The mural I am going to look into is located at the corridor panels of National Palace, which is painted in 1945, and it is a specific part of a greater whole. The whole mural that we can see on the screen right now depicts the Aztec capital, and it is named La Gran Tenochtitlan, the Great Tenochtitlan it means. The fragment I have chosen is addressed as La Malinche, but I am going to talk about it a bit later. First, I would like to take a look at this whole mural. What we see here is the marketplace of Tenochtitlan, the capital of Aztec Empire. It is huge and well crowded with lots of figures. A marketplace was a very important place for Aztec civilization because it was both the sign and product of their political success. The Aztec Empire consisted of 38 city-states, all of them obligated to pay taxes and tributes. Some non-Aztec surrounding cities also gave, in quotation marks, voluntary gifts in order to avoid conflicts. The amount of products flowing into Tenochtitlan was immense and of great variety. Most common goods were fibers, grains, cacao, cotton, golden items, jewelry, paper, timber, hallucinogenic mushrooms, yes, they were into that, honey, ink, and many other exotic stuff. I mean, the birds were very popular in the marketplace, and it was mainly bought by the nobles and especially by the emperor. And snakes were specifically being sold as a pellet for the birds. Cortes reported that the largest market of that time was the market of Tlatelolco, the sister city of Tenochtitlan. These two cities are like two capitals of Aztec Empire, and up to 60,000 people gathered there daily as it was open 24 hours a day all through the year. This is something huge for the 16th century world. This specific part is addressed as La Malinke, which is going to be my focus. La Malinke is the center figure in the middle. She is the woman in white. Her name was Maninsin, but she is more known as La Malinke. She was a Nahua woman who played a key role in the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, acting as an interpreter, advisor, and intermediary for the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortes. She was one of 20 women slaves given to the Spaniards by the natives of Tabasco in 1519. Later, she gave birth to Cortes's first son, Martin, who is considered one of the first mestizos, people of mixed European and indigenous American ancestry. She is understood in various and often conflicting aspects as the embodiment of treachery, the quintessential victim, or simply as symbolic mother of the new Mexican people. The term Malinquista refers to a disloyal compatriot, especially in Mexico. Probably between the age of 8 and 12, Malinke was either sold or kidnapped into slavery. It is likely that some of her people were complicit in trafficking her, regardless of the reason. During her slavery, Malinke started to learn the Chontal Maya language and perhaps Yucatec Maya. This would later enable her to communicate with Jeronimo de Aguilar, another interpreter for Cortes, who also spoke Yucatec Maya alongside his native Spanish. Malinke and Aguilar were crucial for communication, as together they translated Spanish, Mayan, Nahuatl, and vice versa. As you can see, this is not a twice way of translation. There is a three-chain way, which a lot of meaning was lost in the communication process, but I think it was a miracle that any communication were done at all. And in this piece of fragments, there's this chopped off arm in the middle that strikes the attention. I mean, what is this chopped off white arm is doing in the middle of a market in daylight, and why is it white? Why is it offered to Malinke? I assume that it belonged to a very unfortunate white man, and being white, it must be someone European. Considering the historical events of the time, it must be a Spanish man. I would like to interpret this piece as a symbol for La Noche Triste, the sad night when Spaniards were driven out of Tenochtitlan at 1520. In November 1519, Spaniards led by Hernan Cortes arrived at Tenochtitlan. Montezuma II was the Aztec emperor then. According to Florentine codex, Montezuma assumed Cortes to be returned god Quetzalcoatl, which caused him to be welcoming towards them. Spaniards and their native allies, Tlaxcaltecas, were allowed into the city and given a designated compound to reside. Alas, the people of Tenochtitlan did not fully support this decision, and their disturbance increased in time. Abusing Montezuma's welcome, Cortes took him hostage and used him as a puppet king to rule over Aztec people. Later on, he had to leave the city to deal with a problem caused by another Spanish expedition group and left Pedro de Alvarado in charge. In Cortes' absence, de Alvarado ordered the slaughter of Aztec nobles, warriors, and priests who were celebrating in the great temple of Tenochtitlan. The reason is uncertain, but it was most likely to take absolute control of the city by eliminating the local ruling class. Obviously, the massacre did not end well. Survivors of the slaughter informed the city, and it caused a great unrest. When Cortes returned to the city, the unrest snowballed into an uprising, and Spaniards were driven out from Tenochtitlan with great casualty. Many were killed or captured and sacrificed. So why the chopped off arm is offered to Malinke? As mentioned before, the arm represents the defeat of Spaniards, but Malinke ignores it, as we can see from the direction of her look. She is ignoring the arm. She is not looking at that direction. So she ignores it. She refuses to acknowledge the Spanish defeat, as some writings claim that Malinke was offered to betray Cortes, but she refused. choosing Spaniards over native people. And the faces around her is significant because their facial expressions are full of anger, shock, distrust, and many things that are negative. They are condemning her as if she has done something wrong. I think that is why she is depicted the way she is. Compared to other figures in the mural, her skin color is pale, and her facial features are more Western rather than ethnic. That positions her closer to being white and shuns her from native society. The other figure, who is as pale as Malinke, is this merchant. She is without clothing, which is something very significant because clothing meant a lot of things for Aztec people. And also, this may be a hint for her exploitation, because sex trafficking and slavery were pretty common in native Mesoamerican societies. This gesture made by Malinke is also another implication of sex trafficking, in my opinion, because as we know from the writings, she was abducted, kidnapped, and sold into slavery. And it is very possible that she was raped numerous times during her slavery times. So she was first exploited by her own people, then by Cortes. Her sexuality did not belong to her. And this hand gesture is an implication for that. And while we are talking about sex trafficking, not mentioning slaves would be very wrong, because people who were forced into sex work were slaves. You could not do such thing to a noble woman or to a free woman, or man in that case, doesn't really matter. Well, slaves were considered the lowest class of the society. They had no citizenship rights, and they belonged to a master. Although that their quality of life was relatively better than Western slaves, it does not change the fact that they were slaves. Before the imperial era, most likely that Aztec people had no concept of slavery, since they were a nomads and warrior tribe. But as they settled and gained political power, slavery peaked and became essential for their economy. Well, this familiar pose can be seen in any visual art form depicting a slavery inspection. The merchant is checking the naked child's teeth, deciding whether or not he is worth buying. This may be a scene depicting Aztec dentistry, but I doubt that dentists would work on a marketplace and a free child would be naked. As I mentioned before, clothing is significant for Aztec people since it is a sign of wealth, dignity, and reputation. That is why textile tributes and taxes were one of the most important. One type of Aztec currency is some sort of cotton cloth called quachli. Although there were different grades of quachli, about 20 of them could support a commoner for 1 year in Tenochtitlan. Together with many other things, quachli was given as a tax and tribute, and average amount of quachli given was 2 million per year. That is 100,000 people's worth of tributes in 16th century. Moreover, state treasury and the emperor's treasury were the same. Whatever tribute, tax, and gift sent to Tenochtitlan went straight into the emperor's pockets. Emperor paid for every expense though, and shared the imperial resources with the people in times of famine. This system created a highly codependent relationship between the people and the emperor. Many of the emperors knew that their source of wealth is coming from the people. The resource is the people. But that did not stop them from shifting into a luxurious way of life, where they had grandeur palaces full of wild animals and dozens of concubines. Aztec economy heavily relied on tributes and trades, which relied on subordination of city-states. It was ensured and sustained by military intimidation, and the economic flow was dependent on manual work and labor of many kinds, provided by lower-class denizens and slaves. Although Aztec Empire managed to create a state of stability and security, it was earned by military occupations, later sustained by intimidation, and its economy thrived because of its social hierarchy that exploited everyone besides nobles and priests. What Diego Rivera was trying to do was very important, in my opinion, because Spanish conquest covered up and twisted the native history. Decolonizing history and culture is a highly significant step towards gaining a national identity, but it is also important to acknowledge that history of empires are bittersweet. The glory and luxury of a great civilization is often built on blood and labor of others, and Aztec Empire was no exception. As a conclusion, what we see in this depicted scene is that it is the encapsulation of Aztec hegemony. Aztec Empire was not better than Spanish conquistadors. Their policies were expansionist and hegemonic. They conquered and persuaded their rivals through soft and hard powers. The only difference between Spaniards and Aztecs is that Spaniards came from overseas. Both parties subordinated and exploited native people. The choice was to choose a local or a foreign oppressor. So Malinke was not a traitor. She merely favored what was more benefitable to her. Understandably, Mexicans who seek a pre-colonial identity look upon native Mesoamerican civilizations such as Aztec and Maya. In the process, with or without political support, they tend to glorify the past and overlook the problematic parts. The past becomes a romanticized ideal which fuels contemporary agendas. Rivera, supported by the government and many patrons, openly painted according to this goal. Being a member of the Communist Party and a follower of Marxism, he contradicts himself, or becomes what Marxism criticizes. Ideal artists in Marxism should renounce bourgeoisie elitism and join the proletariat, and governments are never proletariat, obviously. So the work of Rivera, are not art, but rather commodities, and his commodities contain bourgeoisie ideologies. Any nation of inequality justifies itself by bringing up its old, glorified past. The glorification of the past sugarcoats the reality. Hitler bragged about his Third Reich. Mussolini immensely funded the excavations of Roman relics. Southern US citizens praised and tried to imitate Greco-Roman culture. Looking upon Aztec Empire is no different from these. As Foucault states, one should totally and absolutely suspect anything that claims to be a return, since there is in fact no such thing as a return. If I had more time for this panel, I would like to look more into a Foucaultian analysis of this painting as well, because I personally really like and appreciate Foucault's way of analyzing history, because he tends to, in my opinion, stand in a point where the readers can criticize contemporary times rather than look upon history and feel good about themselves. And that is all from me. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you very much, Cem Hocam and Foucault Hocam, for everything that you have contributed to the panel.
Buse, thank you so much. This is a wonderful presentation on Marxist art criticism. Very detailed, to the point. And I think you have wonderfully shown that artworks, you've wonderfully shown that this approach examines artworks in their cultural, economic, and political context. And I learned a lot, really. Mexican muralism, it's been praised by Marxist scholars because it is committed to social justice. It is committed to, social justice. And you gave us information on Cortes, that he is the conqueror of the Aztec Empire. But please know that from the indigenous point of view, he was a murderer, right? I mean, he led to the destruction of one of the greatest civilizations in the history of the world. Thank you once again, Buse. And let me introduce our sixth panelist. And Arman Civan will be our next panelist. And Arman Civan will do a biographical reading of Grant Wood's American Gothic. This is significant because Arman's painting is the only American painting of this panel. Now, let's see if it's a satire of small town life. If so, how does biographical art criticism reveal this, Arman? The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Hello, dear viewers at your homes. Thank you, Ufuk Hocam. As Ufuk Hoca said, I will be talking about one of the most iconic and popular American art pieces in history, which is American Gothic by Grant Wood. Since this is a biographical reading, we will be more focusing on his life and what inspired him to make this piece and how this painting came to be. So without further ado, I think we should start with the presentation. Let me just share my screen to you. Yeah, so much like every other popular painting, or let's just say everything popular, this painting has also been parodied many times, let's say. I would like to start this presentation with checking out some of the parodies of this painting. So the first one is a parody of Uncle Sam, which is, I mean, oh, it's okay, but this one is using Simpsons as the guy and the woman, and the Bart is on the background. This one is one of my favorites because it includes Star Wars, of course. And the final one is, I think the funniest and the best depicted one. It's the Turkish Gothic, you might say. The Photoshop is incredible in this one. So anyways, why is this called American Gothic? Let's start with that. Many people probably think it's because of the people on the foreground. They look like Gothic people, like they wear black clothes and they look eerie. But the main reason actually is because of this window on the background. For those who do not know, let's just briefly talk about the Gothic architecture. So you came here to listen about biographical reading of a painting. Now you're getting 2 for 1. I mean, I'm gonna also educate you a little about Gothic architecture anyways. So it started in 1140 AD in France. It was popular from 12th to 17th centuries. As you can see, there are many pointy things on this picture because in order to recognize Gothic architecture, there has to be stained glasses or pointed arcs or slender columns or pointed stuff in general. What I mean by pointed arc is before the 1140, there were round arcs used in architecture. On the left, you can see the round arc. It is mostly used in Roman Empire, but then the French people invented this pointed arc on the right. So I think you can make the connection with the painting. So Grant Dawson Wood was born in February 13th, 1891, and died one day before his 51st birthday on February 12th, 1942. This is on the left is self-portrait of his. In his early years, he spent his early years on Iowa, where he was born in Anamosa. His father died when he was 10 years old. And yeah. So for those who do not know, the Midwestern places in Iowa looks like this most of the time. There are many cornfields or fields in general. So after his father died, his mother sold their farm and they moved to the Cedar Rapids city. And to be honest, Grant Wood didn't like the city life. He missed the fields, he missed the animals there. But until he graduated, he worked on the scenery for school plays and drew pictures for this school newspaper until he graduated. So he was very into arts and crafts during his early ages. Then, after graduating high school, he taught art, created jewelry, and decorated houses for a living. Then, during World War I, he even painted camouflage on tanks. After that, Grant Wood visited Europe several times during 1922 and 1928 to study art. What he studied, I wrote here Europe, but he mainly went to France, by the way. He was heavily influenced by Impressionism and Northern Renaissance in Europe. As you can see, there is the famous Monet painting, Impression Sunrise, on the left. So you might find some similarities between his pictures and the Impressionist pictures, but this one has the most, I think, resemblance to the American Gothic. This is one Ike's Arnolfini wedding, was made in 1434, but as you can see, the faces are long, like the ones in the Grant Wood's American Gothic. You can clearly see he was heavily inspired by Van Eyck, but he went with a simpler, let's say, painting style. So when he returned to the USA, he started working on his own technique. Like later, like I said before, he painted more like a simpler. He used a simpler style, and he really liked making pictures of his own town, Iowa. He painted, fields. He painted people. He painted the everyday life of Iowan people, and because these were the things he liked to see, and he wanted to talk about or paint about. So as he was establishing his own technique, he actually started to be known as a style called, or a movement called, regionalism or American regionalism. He helped it prosper. The regionalism is a movement where people drew pictures or wrote about their own towns or own cities. He later even said, "I had to go to France to appreciate Iowa." He inspired some artists like Thomas Hart Benton. This is another regionalist artist, and his Cradling Wheat painting. John Stuart Curry's Wisconsin landscape. So these are all regionalist movement paintings. And for the inspiration of the Gothic, American Gothic, let's say, the story goes like this. He was driving around in August 1930 in Alden, Iowa, and he came across with this house. The window, the upper window, actually was resembling to those in France because of the Gothic architecture I mentioned a couple minutes ago. So he stopped by and started to take some sketches like this one, and started to wonder about who lived in there, what the people would do in there. The house kind of haunted him for a couple of days. Then he realized he wanted to not only paint the house, but wanted to paint a couple farmers as well. On the first glance, the painting or the people on the painting seem like a husband and wife, but they're rather a father and a daughter. And they were, in fact, the models for the painting were Nan Wood, Grant Wood's sister, and Dr. McKibbe, a dentist, their family dentist. So in this picture, you can see the guy looks kind of grumpy. I don't know if he didn't like the picture or what. The story goes like this. The Nan Wood actually didn't want to be recognized as the wife of this man, so he asked Grant Wood to draw her face a little longer so that people wouldn't recognize her. So originally, actually, Grant Wood wanted to paint her mother, his mother, but she was so sick that she couldn't stand up. So Nan Wood actually wore her mother clothes instead of her. So he entered the painting competition at the Art Institute of Chicago. The jury awarded the painting a bronze medal and a $300 cash prize. As you can see, this is the first announcement of the winners on the New York Times, sorry. You can see on the left, this is our picture. The one on here, the too much acid makes stomach sore, causes sluggishness. This one won the first prize. So after this publishment, he actually became an instantly famous person. After the painting was published in newspapers, there were a backlash from the residents of Iowa who were offended by Wood. They thought he had portrayed them in a offending way. I don't know how. They thought, I think, he was mocking with them. The artist came out to defend his piece by saying that he hadn't intended to mock Iowans, but nothing he said actually solved things. So, interesting enough, a conspiracy made him famous. By this point in time, it was during the Great Depression, more Americans had shifted from agricultural jobs to the manufacturing industry. This caused friction over rural and urban areas. So imagine this, people working in the factories thought, haha, look at those villagers, they look funny. And the supposed villagers, people from Iowa, thought, hey, he's mocking with us, I guess. He actually made a statement about this. There is satire in it, so he admitted there was a satire, but only as there is satire in any realistic statement. These are types of people I have known all my life. I try to characterize them truthfully to make them more like themselves than they were in actual life. I love this quote because that's like when you make a joke, people get offended, and the joke is sometimes even less harsher than the reality. This is somewhat the same thing. In conclusion, so yeah, I don't think Grant Wood tried to make fun of people. This picture can be taken from many angles, like historically or sociologically or economically. But since we are doing a biographical reading on this, I can't say too much about my opinions. I can only, use the historical facts and things Grant Wood said himself. I think it was a nice guy. He didn't mean to hurt anybody. So yeah, that was it. I think. Yeah, can you? Yeah, thank you for listening to me. I think we have
So there will be a one minute break, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Arman. Another biographical art criticism. You approached the American Gothic in relation to this very famous painter, Grant Wood's life. And your reading revealed this connection between Grant Wood and his art. Thank you so very much. And I had a message, I had an email message right now. I didn't even have the time to check it. This is one of our PhD students in the department. His name is Mert Deniz, and he wrote a comment on this painting, and I would like to read it, okay? Mert Deniz, this is Mert Deniz's message to us today. He says, although the art movement of regionalism and Grant Wood is considered among the representatives, he's known for its advocacy for social equality. American Gothic doesn't have any reference to either the Great Depression or the infamous Dust Bowl that hit the Midwest and the Great Plains for the first time and severely affected the American farmers in the neighboring states of Iowa in 1930, the year when American Gothic was publicly exhibited for the first time. Compared to other works of art like John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which successfully captures the economic problems and pertinent psychological devastation of the farmer and their families, Wood's figures are appreciated for their reserved and reticent manners towards the ordeals of their lives. Hence, American Gothic stands for the romantic nostalgia and conservative idealization of its creator that justify helpless conformism rather than portraying the experience of the Midwest farmers in its era. Well, Mert, thank you so much for your time and effort in writing this message to us today. It's really a wonderful contribution. Thank you, Mert. Okay, so I think we are approaching the end of our virtual undergraduate conference. Our final panelist is Bensu Gülçür. And Bensu Gülçür will talk on silent mystery in The Girl with a Pearl Earring, a semiotic analysis. So I guess she will be looking at patterns that exist within the painting that connected to the larger human experience. So I'm really looking forward to your semiotic analysis of The Girl with a Pearl Earring. Ben, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ufuk Hocam. Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening us today. Let me start with the words of art scholar Germaine Greer. He says, the art of Vermeer invites the observer to come closer and become intimate with the painting. Such art reinforces human dignity, he says, and today I will invite you to find more about Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring. So let's see some of the pictures from my presentation. Swiss linguist Fernand de Saussure is one of the leading figures in the study of semiotics. And he laid the groundwork for structuralism in the 20th century. Saussure focused on the structure of language and come up with the terms sign, signifier, and signified. He argued when three are put together, they make a meaningful unit. Considering this, French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss gave momentum to structuralist movement in France. He suggested the signs make up the structure behind the art. Based on Strauss' argument, today I will focus on Signs in the Girl with a Pearl Earring by Jan Vermeer and analyze the structure behind these signs. Vermeer lived in 17th century Netherlands and he was highly influenced by its socio-economic conditions. In the early 60s, the Dutch were in the domain of Spain and their economy was dependent on other nations. The Dutch find the solution to build their own trading network in the Far East through merchants and finally establishing their own colonies. People formed the Dutch East India Company, VOC, with the capital financed by the very Dutch people. They bought shares of the company in exchange for its future profits. This was the earliest example of modern-day capitalism. The Netherlands became extremely wealthy thanks to Dutch East India Company. Not only did it contribute to trade, but also it occupied lands and enforced slavery in its colonies. From these colonies, the spices, clothes, and precious stones came to the Netherlands. In 1648, Spanish control mostly ended, and the Dutch gained its independence. Later, the period would be known as the Dutch Golden Age. The birth of capitalist society led to artistic production in the Netherlands in 17th century. Along with middle-class urban elites, ordinary people also bought paintings, and almost every Dutch house hanged them as decor. The new rich preferred middle-class subjects with the familiar objects present in the painting. This newly emerged class favored Calvinism instead of Catholicism. Also, they were against aristocracy and supported the self-rule of people. Hatred among kings paved the way to democracy in the future. Also, there was religious tolerance and sense of liberty was present with the help of Calvinist effect. Although it may limit freedom in a sense, people find a middle ground to interpret the religious doctrines, especially without the strong influence of the church or bishops. These developments influenced the artists, including Vermeer. He was living in Delft, one of the most prosperous cities of Holland at the time. He painted religious matters, but his main subjects were still life, landscape, genre painting, and other secular subjects. Although Vermeer was a Protestant, after his marriage with a Catholic woman, Catherine Bones, he converted to Catholicism. During his life, he became a member of the Guild of St. Luke, which is a trade association for painters. As I mentioned before, the art production significantly increased and guilds like St. Luke became the frequent destination of the artists. With his connections, Vermeer got to know a local art collector, Peter van Riven, who is known to encourage his painting career in many cases. If we look at the girl with a pearl earring with semiotic analysis, we can see the turban and the pearl tell the narrative of the Dutch Golden Age. When we look at the pearl, we understand the Dutch Republic was wealthy at the time. Moreover, the turban was not originally from Delft, so people can understand that it came to the Netherlands from somewhere, allegedly the Far East. It had become a fashion of the Dutch society for a long time. For instance, in other Dutch painters' works, like in Jan van Eyck's portrait of a man in a red turban and Michael Swier's boy in a turban holding a nosegay, we can see the turban examples. In The Girl with a Pearl Earring, the exotic turban gives an oriental feeling to the canvas. It also represents the worthiness of the new merchant class of the Dutch Republic. As I mentioned before, the Dutch was influenced by Calvinism. Therefore, people were abstaining from gaudiness, although the nation was very rich. Vermeer achieved this by drawing a simple girl whose identity is unknown, which makes this painting universal. The urban enables the viewer to look at it from a wider perspective. It subtly represents the Dutch influence in the globe. Moreover, while looking at the turban, we can also see the desire for sailing in the high seas. It tells the story of the merchant ships that contributed to the Dutch wealth. Apart from representing those sailors, we can say Vermeer himself might be represented in the painting. The turban shows Vermeer's wish to escape from his everyday life to the tranquility that he hopes to find in the Oriental. Another striking sign in the painting is pearl. With its extraordinary size, the pearl is shining and it's not humble at all. It looks very elegant. Pearls were rarely found at the time, which makes them extremely expensive. The Dutch Republic was transporting pearls through Dutch East India Company from Asia to Amsterdam. Therefore, pearls represent Dutch wealth at the time. Accompanied by the turban, the whole vibe in the painting has become mysterious. Although we know that Vermeer mostly painted secular subjects, I cannot help wondering if the pearl and turban have a religious connotation, following with a critique. Given the religious connotation, he criticizes people for being wealth-oriented. He reminds the importance of faith and temporality of the earthly goods. So the girl becomes a symbol of faith with her turban. Being not too obvious, Vermeer delicately gives his message. His other criticism is about Dutch wealth. Although the nation was highly rich at the time, Vermeer was not, and he couldn't possibly afford a real pearl of this size. If we take a closer look at the painting, we see it is not a pearl, but rather a thin drop in a pearl shape made by brush strokes. In fact, Vermeer created an illusion, and this is his criticism of the new Dutch capitalism. By drawing a fake pearl worn by an ordinary girl, Vermeer tries to demolish the barriers of aristocracy. However, the barrier between the rich and the poor is too strong to be broken. So, to raise attention, he deliberately drew so-called pearl in an extraordinary size. The Dutch claim to be humble, but continue to exploit the world with its colonies. While the rich get richer, the poor only slightly enjoy this abundance. Moreover, this wealth is coming from elsewhere. The workers in the Dutch plantations and slaves suffer from greedy capitalism. In conclusion, the silent mystery of the girl with a pearl earring tells us about the economics and politics of the 17th century Holland. By looking at the signs, we could see the bigger structure that exists beyond the artwork. I believe
Thank you so much.
sorry Ufuk Hocam, I believe this is the power of a true artwork. So thank you very much for your contributions. This is all for me.
Thank you so much, Bensu. Yeah, this is really wonderful what you did with this very famous painting. Actually, you said almost everything that needs to be said, nothing much left for me to say. Perhaps I will remind you of Charles Sanders Peirce semiotics, right? Peirce's sign has three parts: the icon, the index, and the symbol. And symbol is related to iconography as well. And Peirce's symbol depends on all these conventional agreed upon meanings. So thank you so much for exploring the turban and the pearl that really show us how meaning is created and how meaning is interpreted in a semiotic analysis. Thank you so much, Bensu. Well, we had another message about a couple of minutes ago from another PhD student, Fatma Eren. Fatma Eren is our research assistant, and I would like to read her message. Thank you so much for this message, Fatma. Fatma well, this is what Fatma wrote about Vermeer's A Girl with a Pearl Earring. I think this is a feminist analysis of the painting. This is what she says. Fatma says, being a shadowy figure in art history, Vermeer himself had a wife who bore him 15 children. When we think of the time it was painted and the fact that the painter's own life was dominated by so much family obligations, the girl in the painting may represent the type of woman the painter wants to see, which is really interesting. A woman who is bold enough to resist the expected sex role and who doesn't submit herself to traditional roles dictated by patriarchy, says Fatma. And she goes on saying, unlike his other paintings, Girl with a Pearl Earring doesn't feature a woman who is in the domestic sphere, tending her child or doing housework. Instead, he portrays a woman who seems to make an eye contact with the viewer. Her gazing with her wide eyes serves to grab and hold the viewer's attention, and it displays her endeavor to defy the general attitude of Western artists who usually depict women as passive ornaments intended primarily for male gaze. It seems that she has the potential to subvert inferior position through her assertive eyes. In this sense, her image evokes a profound sensation that she's a conscious being who is capable of judging and scrutinizing the viewer. Therefore, she dismisses the effect of male gaze through establishing a mutual gaze. At this point, her look may create a disturbing feeling on the viewer who doesn't want to face her agency as a subject. With his painting, Vermeer displays the idea that women also have intelligent and complex inner lives as well. Well, Fatma, thank you so much for this great contribution. It's really opening a new, horizon to this painting, Fatma. Well, I guess this is the end of the panel today. I would like to thank all our panelists for their presentations. Our young art critics, thank you for your effort and research. Today I started out saying art criticism is an evolving field, as is literary criticism. Today we didn't have time for that. We didn't talk about, for example, environmental art criticism. At the moment, environmental art is intriguing art critics, and already there are publications such as, for example, I would like to show this book to you, such as EcoC. I would like to show another book, A Keener Perception, Eco-Critical Studies in American Art History. Please take note of these books. And please take a look at the websites. For example, there's one wonderful website, Green Arts Web. And there's also a resources list, Eco Art Network resources list. Please take a look at these websites. And these are all ecologically aware art or eco art in pursuit of a sustainable planet. You see, our experience with COVID-19 demonstrates that we, humanity, we are not separate from the world around us. So eco art criticism is contributing to this paradigm shift. I hope we will have another art criticism panel and include environmental art criticism as well in the next one. So I would also like to talk to our listeners today from far away, wherever you are, in which city you are. Thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you so much, our senior students who took my art theory and criticism class this semester and collaborated in this wonderful event. It's been our department's first virtual undergraduate panel, and I think this was a success. I wish everybody a wonderful day, and I would like to thank one more time my dear colleague, Dr. Cem Kılıçarslan, for all the technical help he provided, and also Elif Su Saçbüken for her technical support. Hope to see you very soon, and I hope this pandemic will be over very soon so that we get together in our department and go on collaborating in our classrooms. Bye-bye.